At exactly 7:12 a.m., because apparently tyranny runs on a schedule, 3 HOA board members, dressed in matching navy fleece vests and clutching clipboards like holy relics, trudged up the dirt path to my remote log cabin in the Smoky foothills. Without a word, they slapped a laminated citation on my pine door and then, with the smugness of a history-making moment, posed for a group selfie like they'd just bagged Bin Laden. There was just one glaring problem. The cabin wasn't in their jurisdiction. It wasn't even in their county. My name's Dustin Harrow, age 44. I'm a mild-mannered software engineer by trade, the kind of guy who apologizes to furniture when I bump into it. 3 years ago, I'd fled the HOA madness of Elia Estates, a suburban Tennessee maze of identical beige homes and eternally feuding neighbors, and bought myself a quiet, off-grid cabin 2 hours away. No Wi-Fi. No HOA. Just me, a wood-burning stove, and a trout-filled creek. It was supposed to be my escape from petty suburban politics. My little slice of heaven in the mountains. Turns out, heaven is apparently subject to Tamara CVY's rule. Tamara, platinum blonde, always draped in pearls like she was allergic to modesty, was the president for life of the Elia Estates HOA. She'd once spent 4 straight hours in a Zoom meeting debating mailbox gloss levels. I stopped attending after that. Apparently, my absence branded me in her mind as an uninvolved homeowner, which in Tamara speak meant enemy combatant. The harassment started small. The first letter arrived by certified mail on a Tuesday morning. Tamara accused me of illegal detachment from community oversight, and claimed my cabin violated aesthetic unity protocols. When I sent back a polite but firm letter explaining the cabin wasn't in Elia Estates, and never had been, she responded by fining me $500 a week for non-compliance with visual expectations. First I laughed. Who in their right mind fines someone for a property outside their jurisdiction? Then came the surveillance. My neighbor Jerry called one afternoon, voice equal parts amused and unsettled. He'd spotted Tamara's husband, Roger, flying a drone over my cabin from the public road. Another neighbor, Sarah, caught Tamara herself crouching near my compost bin, muttering about feral landscaping, while snapping pictures of my vegetable garden. She had driven 2 hours just to photograph my tomatoes. Things escalated fast. One day, I opened a thick envelope from the HOA's law firm. Inside was a lien notice against my townhouse back in Elia Estates, claiming I owed $30,000 in unpaid HOA fees for off-site structures. My hands shook. They were actually trying to seize my real home to punish me for a cabin that had nothing to do with their HOA. That's when I called Clive Hennings, a retired JAG officer turned property lawyer. The moment Clive saw the so-called jurisdiction map they'd enclosed, he nearly fell out of his chair laughing. Someone had literally taken a black Sharpie and drawn a crude blob around my cabin, pretending it was part of Elia Estates. It looked like a 5-year-old's treasure map. Clive filed a countersuit for harassment, fraudulent lien placement, and trespassing. Cease and desist letters went out to every board member. Tamara, however, doubled down. Daily violation notices began arriving. I was cited for unauthorized wildlife feeding because I had bird feeders, and improper waste management for my perfectly legal septic system. Then came the twist. Channel 7 News got wind of the story after Clive tipped them off. Their headline: HOA leader claims control over unaffiliated land. The interview was pure television gold. Tamara, hair flawless and pearls gleaming, sat there on live TV explaining her theory of extended governance using actual hand puppets. A princess puppet represented the HOA. A troll puppet represented non-compliant homeowners. The news anchor's frozen half-smile told the whole story. Within days, I had a restraining order against Tamara and her HOA task force. Sheriff Tom Garrett, whose county my cabin actually belonged to, issued a public statement that had me laughing so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. This land has no HOA and never will. Also, stop stapling laminated notices to trees. That's littering. Apparently, he'd caught them in the act during one of their reconnaissance trips. The final blow came during an emergency HOA meeting, chaired by a visibly sweating Vice President Harold Simmons. Meeting minutes, leaked to me by Sarah, revealed that Tamara had used $8,000 of HOA funds to hire a private investigator and stay 5 nights at a lakeside B&B. All for the purpose of spying on my cabin. The homeowners of Elia Estates were furious, like pitchforks and torches furious. In a single weekend, neighborhood gossip channels lit up with demands for receipts, transparency, and above all else, Tamara's immediate resignation. At the emergency meeting, she stood at the podium, knuckles white on the wood, voice pitched high with righteous indignation. She insisted she'd only been protecting the community's values. Her argument died the moment Vice President Harold Simmons presented the financial records. Not only had Tamara billed the HOA for 5 nights at a lakeside bed and breakfast and a private investigator, she'd also bought night vision goggles and a GPS tracker with community funds. Even her staunchest loyalists started sliding their chairs away from her. The district attorney's office stepped in after multiple homeowners filed formal complaints. The president goes rogue. Tamara was indicted for misuse of HOA funds and fraud. Her mugshot was front-page news. Lip gloss flawless, hair an absolute disaster. The local paper ran it under the headline, HOA president goes rogue. At trial, Clive, my unflappable lawyer, walked in carrying an enlarged copy of the infamous Sharpie-edited jurisdiction map. He propped it on an easel, pointed to the blob of black ink drawn around my cabin, and noted the pirate-style X she'd added over it, as if my home were buried treasure. The courtroom erupted in laughter. The judge had to call for order 3 separate times. The prosecution, led by ADA Rebecca Morrison, came armed for war. She presented evidence that Tamara had created a secret Facebook group called Elia Enforcement Squad, 43 members strong, dedicated to running surveillance on my cabin. Members took shifts photographing my property, earning points for violations they documented. 10 points scored you a Starbucks gift card, paid for naturally with HOA funds. Then came the smoking gun, a video pulled from Tamara's own phone. She'd accidentally live-streamed herself at 2 a.m., trespassing on my land, tape measure in hand, whispering to her husband Roger about gnome spacing violations for her so-called expanded jurisdiction file. She even had pre-printed violation forms on her clipboard. Witnesses for the prosecution. The witnesses lined up like a parade of disbelief. Margaret Peelum, sweet and silver-haired, testified that Tamara once knocked on her door trying to get her to sign a petition extending HOA boundaries to include any property owned by Elia residents, anywhere in the world. Tamara even brought a tablet with a PowerPoint presentation, animated transitions, stock corporate music and all. David Krause, a landscaper, revealed that Tamara tried to hire his crew to secretly plant non-compliant species on my cabin's property so she could fine me for them. When he refused, she offered him $2,000 in cash from what she called a community beautification grant. His phone still had the texts, complete with her specifying purple petunias to be planted at night. Tamara's defense. When it came time for her to testify, Tamara walked to the stand in a navy blue suit and her signature pearls. She launched into a speech about safeguarding property values, invoking aesthetic contamination, and the broken windows theory. The judge rubbed his temples. When the prosecutor pressed her on how a cabin 2 hours away could possibly impact Elia's property values, she admitted, without shame, that she'd singled me out because I'd skipped the HOA potluck 3 years in a row and never contributed to the bake sale fundraiser. She even coined a diagnosis: community detachment disorder. The jury blinked at her like they were waiting for a punchline that never came. The pile of evidence. Rebecca Morrison then revealed Tamara had spent over $12,000 of her own money hiring private investigators. 3 different firms, in fact. The first 2 refused to operate outside HOA jurisdiction. The third took her cash and handed her Google Earth screenshots. The rest of the evidence was a master class in obsessive overreach. Emails about hiring actors to pose as code enforcement officers. Fake violation notices with completely made-up ordinance numbers. False reports filed with the county health department to try and get my cabin condemned. And then there was the piece de resistance. A 3-ring binder labeled Project Rustic Compliance. Inside were detailed plans to annex not just my cabin, but 17 other vacation homes owned by Elia residents. Hand-drawn maps. Enforcement schedules. Custom violation forms for off-grid properties. On page 47, a crayon drawing labeled Greater Elia Empire, complete with little flags planted across 3 states. It was like a middle school geography project. If middle schoolers were drunk on power. The forensic accountant's testimony was the nail in Tamara's perfectly polished coffin. She had, it turned out, constructed a shadow budget inside the HOA's finances, tucking her cabin espionage expenses under absurd categories like miscellaneous beautification and emergency aesthetic response. Over just 18 months, she siphoned nearly $40,000 toward her mountain stakeout campaign. The purchases were something to behold. A used panel van, repainted in HOA colors, complete with magnetic door signs and an amber light bar, so it looked like some kind of official neighborhood patrol unit. Surveillance equipment, travel costs, field meals, Reed lakeside brunches, and the infamous night vision goggles. It was less community management, and more small-town Bond villain. The verdict. When the verdict came, it was swift and brutal. Guilty, on all counts. Fraud, embezzlement, harassment, and misuse of fiduciary authority. Senior District Judge William Hartley, 30 years on the bench and visibly unimpressed, leaned forward and delivered a statement that will live in legal legend. He called Tamara's behavior delusional, vindictive, and borderline psychotic, labeling it a gross abuse of power and an embarrassment to community governance. Her sentence: 1 year in federal prison, with 2 additional years suspended. 2 years probation and 300 hours of community service. Ironically, helping people deal with HOA disputes. $50,000 restitution to the HOA and $30,000 to me for legal fees and emotional distress. Mandatory psychiatric evaluation and monthly therapy focused on power dynamics and boundary issues. Real estate license suspended for 5 years. Banned from living in any HOA community for 10 years after release. The meltdown. As Judge Hartley read the sentence, Tamara's complexion went from cherry red to ghost white to an alarming shade of eggplant. Then she shot to her feet so fast her chair toppled with a bang. "This is a conspiracy against dedicated community leaders," she shrieked, her voice bouncing off the courtroom walls. "You don't understand the importance of aesthetic continuity." The bailiffs moved in. Tamara snatched her purse, dug out her HOA president's gavel, and hurled it toward the prosecutor. It missed by a solid 6 feet and clattered harmlessly to the floor. She was escorted out, 2 bailiffs, 1 on each arm, still yelling about property values and the sanctity of uniform mailbox heights. Her parting shot, just before the heavy courtroom doors swung shut. "You'll all have mismatched mailboxes. And like it."